Mark, welcome back to the pod. You've
Thank
been
you.
with the president in the Middle East, in Sharm el-Sheikh. My favourite live report of yours was when you organised a special guest star. Explain what happened.
Yeah, I have to. I was closer to the holidaymakers of Sharm el-Sheikh than I was to the American president. Very close to them, in fact. Such is the risk, Martha, as you well know, of doing live reporting from holiday resorts, and Sharm el-Sheikh is certainly one of them. You end up getting the holidaymakers in your live shot, and that is exactly what happened. One particular holidaymaker in his Speedos came past me right in front of the live shot. Very embarrassing.
But very, very funny. I'm Martha Kelner in Los Angeles.
And I'm Mark Stone, back in Washington, D.C., in Trump 100 Towers. And today on the pod, the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, meets Donald Trump in Washington as the president doubles down on an unwillingness to further arm Ukraine.
And I chat to Sky News' economics and data editor Ed Conway about Trump's tariff agenda and America's ongoing trade war with China. What's the latest on that and what should we expect next? Mark, you arrived back stateside just in time for the No Kings protests over the weekend. Did you see any of what was going on?
Yeah, well, I did actually. Just as I arrived back at my house, I saw a couple of protesters heading down to downtown DC. With resist posters in their hands. So yeah, it was a big affair in DC, as it was right across the country. More than 2,600 events across almost every state. One of these protest days took place in June, but organisers said far more turned out this time, around 5 million people in all.
Yeah, this was definitely one of the biggest days of protests against the Trump administration so far since his inauguration in January. I was sort of intrigued about what the messaging was, what was going on. So I went down to a street actually in Venice, which is one of the most expensive, trendiest parts of LA, a place where you can buy a matcha latte for $12, lots of sort of high-end shops and
just your sort
nice
of place,
houses
Martha.
and things. Exactly, that's the circles I mix in. I saw people dressed as cowboys. They had signs saying California Cowboys against Trump. So he's definitely lost the California Cowboys, wherever they are. Signs saying veto the Cheeto, no kings, only drag queens. Trump was asked whether these protests had got to him. He said that he'd not been bothered by them. His social media feed, though, was saying different because
it was.
He posted these. You saw that AI video, Mark?
I did. Yeah, I did. I mean, it takes time sometimes to get back into the groove when you've been out of the country, but it didn't take me long this time because the tone was set with the post that you're about to describe for anyone who didn't see it.
Yeah, so he posted this video of himself wearing a crown, flying a fighter jet with King Trump on the side to the Top Gun soundtrack. And he is dumping, and I urge people to check out this video, he's dumping what can only be described as colossal amounts of crap on these AI-generated protesters. It wasn't exactly what you'd call a classically presidential response, but it did have an impact. Everyone here has seen it.
I mean, what next, eh? I mean, the fact that he or his team decided to use the official White House account to post an image like that, or a video like that. But not only that, there was another of Trump and J.D. Vance wearing crowns, juxtaposed with Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries wearing sombreros. We've seen those images before, but now next to Trump wearing a crown. I mean, he's literally saying it up front, out in the open. He feels so emboldened right now that he just doesn't care. For his base, it's all very funny. It's a joke. For him, it's a joke as well, I'm sure, although maybe not. Maybe he's preparing us for what comes next. Maybe he will run for a third term. We've seen the Trump 2028 hats everywhere. I mean, he's trolling people in real time with those hats and with these posts. As I say, emboldened. He is so emboldened. He's so confident right now that he feels that he can do all of this. And actually, people just shrug their shoulders and go, oh, there we go. There he goes again. But this is the president of the United States. It's extraordinary.
And it's this new challenge for Democrat leaders on how they fight back against this new form of political messaging, which is essentially online trolling. And the only person who seems to be, fighting back in kind is the California governor, Gavin Newsom, who himself is, putting out memes all the time.
Well, I was going to say, look, looking at what Trump's doing on social media, looking at all the protests, I mean, huge numbers. But the one thing that appears to be completely missing from all this is leadership, fight back leadership. Yes, Gavin Newsom has been out there since the beginning, but he doesn't really. I don't know what you think. For me, it doesn't really feel like he's broken through. No, and we've said this before, but the structure of American politics means that there is no official opposition figure. There is no one in Washington who is the opposition figure who can butt up against Donald Trump and take that kind of national leadership role, who can then harness all the protests, that the street movement that we are undoubtedly seeing across the country, can harness that, can take that in behind them, and then lead as an opposition leader. That figure simply does not exist.
And more division on the way, because just before we came to record this podcast, Mark, the Supreme Court have swooped in to say that the Trump administration can send National Guard troops to Portland, which is the largest city in Oregon, for assistance in securing federal buildings and to support ongoing raids by the immigration authorities there. That is a decision to watch closely to see whether troops are sent in and what kind of counter-protest that may spark, because Portland's been one of the hotspots for these anti-immigration protests. I did see, though, a bunch of people last week turned up on bikes naked to patrol that main immigration building in Portland last week. So perhaps a form of trolling by the Democrats there.
Yeah, how very apt for Portland, that uber liberal city in the Pacific Northwest. If there is one city that sums up everything that Donald Trump hates, it's probably Portland. A potential big flashpoint in the days ahead for sure. Now, from one flashpoint to another, Martha, some new reporting over the weekend to suggest that meeting last Friday between Donald Trump and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy did actually go very badly. I mean, I watched on the flight over from the UK. Actually, I watched some of the coverage of the meeting, and my sense is that Volodymyr Zelenskyy's sort of demeanour suggested it didn't go very well, and then the weekend reporting from the Financial Times suggests that actually it turned into a shouting match, not dissimilar to the one we saw back in February in the Oval Office between Trump and Zelenskyy, this time, though, off camera. It certainly the suggestion is that things did not go at all well. And a massive U-turn, essentially, because I was in the UN headquarters, 3 weeks ago now, and I was with Volodymyr Zelenskyy. I spoke to him. He was upbeat. He said that Donald Trump is a game changer because Trump back then had sent out a tweet which suggested that Ukraine could perhaps win all of its territory back. So it must be so incredibly hard. It's hard enough for us. I mean, what is it like for Zelenskyy and for his team to think they've got Trump to one place and then suddenly they come to Washington and find he's in a completely different place?
There was one moment where I think I saw Donald Trump visibly shift and grow angry at Zelenskyy. And it was when one of the reporters asked, what's the difference in diplomacy between President Biden and President Trump? And Zelenskyy gives this quite diplomatic answer, but that was a golden opportunity for Zelenskyy to, beat Biden over the head with a hammer and really 100%. Please the guy at the other side of the desk. And he didn't. And immediately after Zelenskyy had finished answering, Donald Trump, came back with Biden was grossly incompetent and I'm very competent. And his mood visibly changed towards Zelenskyy. And then one of the Ukrainian reporters spoke up, asked a question, and Trump suggested or intimated that Zelenskyy had planted that reporter there. And I think it went downhill from then.
Yeah, I mean, it's an example of where Volodymyr Zelenskyy may be a very genuine person, but he's not necessarily the most agile. We saw it, viscerally back in February, where he dealt with that moment badly. He was kind of ambushed by Trump and by JD Vance, and he didn't deal with it well. And again, as you point out, I mean, he could have he could have offloaded on Joe Biden. What's he got to lose? Biden's, yesterday's man.
Exactly.
And he could literally have said, well, it went terribly with Biden. We didn't get anywhere. And now with the man sitting next to me, I really feel like we might make some progress. He might not have meant it, but he could have said it, because we know that makes a big difference with Donald Trump. You're right. It was perhaps an important moment. And fast forward just a few days to today with the Australian Prime Minister. And of course, the questions for Trump were largely still about Ukraine. And today, Trump was saying he doesn't think that Ukraine can actually win the war.
Over here, please.
Mr. President, on the war that you haven't solved yet, the Ukraine-Russia situation, have you now locked in a meeting? And can you explain, just a few weeks ago at UNGA, you said that Ukraine could possibly win the war and...
Well, they could. They could still win it. I don't think they will, but they could still win it. I never said they would win it. I said they could win. Anything can happen. War is a very strange thing.
So there we go. A few weeks ago at the UN, Trump saying he reckoned Ukraine could win back all of the land. Now he's saying Ukraine cannot win the war at all. So it's head spinning.
Yeah, a complete shift from Donald Trump again. But I think what is clear is there's no Tomahawk missiles heading to Ukraine. And Trump seems to be repeating the talking points of Vladimir Putin now. Once again.
Incidentally, I have been trying to get a little bit of clarity out of the Ukrainian embassy here in Washington today, just trying to ascertain the extent to which the embassy thinks that the Financial Times reporting of the shouting match is accurate. The response I got was it wasn't so bad. So that make of that.
Not an emphatic denial.
No. It wasn't so bad. And actually, since then, the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States has released a statement, and I'll read it to you because I think it's interesting. She says President Zelenskyy and President Trump had one of the most meaningful and detailed discussions on potential ways to stop the war last Friday. It goes on to say this candid dialogue between the two leaders lays a solid foundation for future efforts to end the war and achieving a lasting and just peace in Ukraine. And it goes on to say it is impossible to remain indifferent when we speak of lives lost, homes destroyed, and crimes committed. The leadership of the United States, combined with other international efforts, will help bring this war to an end. So for me, that feels like an attempt to get things maybe back on track a little bit. But the key line for me there, which I think hints at potential disagreements and tempers fraying in that private meeting, was the line where the ambassador says it is impossible to remain indifferent when we speak of lives lost, homes destroyed, and crimes committed. That suggests that maybe Zelenskyy was getting, irritated at the lack or the perceived lack of support or the flip-flopping from the American president. I get the sense it was a heated discussion. But the way they're framing it now is heated discussions are helpful to get both sides to the right place.
Zelenskyy also saying today that he's ready to join, or he's prepared to meet Vladimir Putin. Zelenskyy heading to London on Friday for more meetings with European leaders as well.
Yeah, and we know too that Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, is heading to Budapest for meetings with his opposite number, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. That will pave the way potentially for this meeting that Trump says he will have with Putin, also in Budapest, the Hungarian capital. Trump said last week it would happen within 2 weeks. I doubt that, but we'll see. It may happen soon. Now, Martha, we mentioned the Australian Prime Minister. He was here on the face of it to discuss trade. That was the reason he flew all the way around the world, along with his Australian press corps, who were complaining to my colleague David Blevins at the White House today that they'd flown for 20 hours or so to be here for a very quick meeting, and then they're going to fly another 20 hours to get all the way home again. That is a long, long way. But there was some work to be done. They signed a bumper $8 billion deal on critical minerals. This is all an effort to counter China's dominance of the rare earths market. And Martha, you've been chatting to our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, about all of this, haven't you?
Yeah, we were talking a lot about China. China is exerting more and more pressure on Trump, especially with their command of the rare earths industry. I'm no expert on this. Ed Conway definitely is. He was in DC. He'd spent a long week with people in the know at the annual International Monetary Fund, the IMF meetings. And Ed, excellent at explaining the significance of all this. Ed, thank you ever so much for coming on Trump 100 again, old friend of the podcast.
It's a privilege for me.
You're too kind. We're talking Trump and economics and tariffs today. He obviously had Tariff Liberation Day towards the start of his tenure. It's been one of the key facets of his presidency. He uses tariffs as leverage whenever possible. Where are we at with his approach? And do you think it's working for him politically?
I think actually this was a really interesting period. So I'm out here to kind of meet with the finance ministers around the International Monetary Fund.
Yeah.
One of the most interesting things this time was last time around, 6 months ago. Okay, they looked at their economic growth forecasts and they said, because of the tariffs, we're going to cut our growth forecasts, and so everyone is going to be a bit poorer off. And this time around, they said, oh, okay, we're going to look again at our growth forecast. And it turns out growth actually is going to be exactly the same as we thought it was going to be before we cut it last time around.
Right.
And it's the interesting thing is when you kind of like delve into that and ask, okay, so why is that? And basically it's because tariffs hadn't had the negative impact that they thought they were going to have. They haven't pushed up prices here in the US as much as people thought they would. The economists thought they would. They haven't dampened growth as much as they thought they would. And here's for me, Martha, is like the most interesting thing is there are some people who still think, okay, at some point you're just inevitably going to have pain. Okay, at some point you're importing all this stuff still. You're putting a higher cost on and getting that stuff into the country, and therefore it's going to rise. Inflation goes up, and everyone is poorer as a result. That's what all of the textbooks say. But actually, there are quite a few people in the fund and elsewhere who are like, well, maybe actually it's not going to be as painful as people thought.
Right.
And so we're in this kind of weird like hinterland. I mean, still most economists think you're throwing sand in the wheels of trade, and whenever you do that, it causes pain. But I think Trump will have looked at this to the extent that he pays any attention to the International Monetary Fund, which I don't think he really does. But actually, Scott Bessent, his Treasury Secretary, definitely does. He was in the meetings. I think they will feel like this was, for them, a victory over all of the conventional economists, because finally they are not quite as gloomy as they were before about tariffs. The jury is still out, in truth. And I think partly the kind of difficulty here is everyone around the world, including us, including kind of businesses, including economists, is kind of looking towards the White House, around the corner from where I am at the moment. They're looking at the White House and they're going, what on earth is he going to come up with next week? Like 2 weeks ago, it looked like the China tariff was going to be, kind of 30%. Then China kicks in, as we'll talk about probably in a bit, about with these new rare earths rules, kind of limiting the amount of rare earths, these critical minerals that it's sending out.
Yeah.
And then Trump's like, oh, well, you're back on, another 100% on you. And we're back to kind of where we were a few months ago. And trying in that environment to anticipate, when you're thinking about sending a container ship across the Pacific, when is the best time to send it? That's madness. It's incredibly difficult to do.
All of these sort of people and businesses just trying to anticipate the whims of one man in the White House. And I guess what you were saying there about this ongoing US-China battle over rare earths, you wrote a fascinating piece about the impact on the little cases that have AirPods inside them. Can you just explain what's happening there and why?
Basically, if you're making anything, pretty much anything that in modern technology these days relies on this whole spectrum of loads of different elements, and rare earths are kind of they're almost best thought of as a kind of condiment that you sprinkle on other things to make them better. They're like the salt and pepper and the spices of the kind of chemical engineering world.
I love it.
If you add them to certain elements, then you end up with like really strong magnets.
Right.
And I know magnets sounds like quite a kind of, who cares about magnets? Like without magnets, you don't have motors. And without motors, you don't have robots. And without magnets, you don't have kind of little tiny speakers and microphones, and without little tiny speakers and microphones, you don't have the earbuds that go into our ears. And so, if you have a pair of AirPods or earbuds made by other kind of manufacturers, there are many different types available. they are all dependent on rare earths. And these rare earths at the moment, 90% of them come from China. The vast majority come out of the ground in China. Even more kind of get refined in China. They have an extraordinary stranglehold on the entire supply of this stuff. And that matters because it's not just AirPods and things going in our ears. It is also military equipment. You need a lot of these magnets and other bits and pieces to go in military equipment. It's the turbine blades that go into jets. It is the turbines that go into gas-fired power stations. So if you want a power station, and we kind of need power stations in the world, you need rare earths. Not that many, but you need some. And basically they all come from China. And China recently, they've always kind of, known that this was one of the things, the kind of strangleholds they have on the global economy. But just recently they imposed this rule saying, listen, if you're going to be using these things in the future, you need a license from Beijing, which is a pretty big thing to do. And that was the moment where Donald Trump was like, well, hold on, if you're doing that, then I'm going to want extra tariffs on you. There are lots of theories out here. And again, the interesting thing for me to come to Washington is you've got all of these finance ministers, economists kind of saying, well, why are they doing this? There's one theory that says it's all part of the trade, negotiations between Xi and Trump. And Xi basically thinks this is his best way of getting a deal out of Donald Trump. But there's another thesis that says actually China is just trying to do everything it can to control manufacture of weapons around the world, which it kind of could do if everyone complied with these rules. And I think the long and the short of it is this has caused consternation around the world because it's another sign of China flexing its muscles at the same time as Donald Trump, doing what he's doing.
To simplify it, there's this sort of tit for tat going on at the moment, isn't there, between the US and China, and this tumultuous relationship between Donald Trump and President Xi of China. They're obviously expected to meet later this month. How important is that summit when it comes to shifting the dial? How important are those sort of personal relationships? Do you think
is it still on as far as you know?
We think
at the time we're talking.
Yeah, at the time we're talking, it's still on. So Bessent said he expects it to happen, and the noises from Trump are that it probably will still happen. So yeah. It's
it's a big moment because, as you say, Martha, it's like these are the two protagonists. If you could kind of narrow it down to two protagonists in the global economy right now, it's China and America. It's Xi and Trump.
Yeah.
And they haven't really had their kind of big moment of meeting this time around. I get the impression from talking to people here who are kind of part of the administration that for them tariffs are not something that is going away anytime soon.
Yeah.
And once you have imposed tariffs, then all of a sudden it becomes really difficult to get rid of them. And part of the reason that it becomes more difficult to get rid of them is they are starting to see quite a lot of tariff revenue coming in. So money that's raised by tariffs, and quite a bit of that is stuff coming from China. And if you're raising that money and you've got kind of billions of dollars, which, by the way, we're probably going to hear from from Trump at some point that he's going to turn that into a tax rebate for people, then it becomes pretty difficult to remove these things. And so from an economic standpoint, again, we're in new territory here where for decades and decades and decades, tariffs were coming down around the world, US but elsewhere, and now all of a sudden they're going up. And the genie is out of the bottle, and it's quite hard to see how it kind of goes back in. But as for the kind of US-Chinese relationship, it's hard to see it becoming kind of a sanguine, comfortable relationship anytime soon. And I reckon, part of the reason for that, obviously, APEC is an interesting moment, that meeting, is because there's this sense that America might have miscalculated and put more power in the hands of its opponents, the Chinas and the Indias, and that they together could club together and create this bigger economic bloc outside of America. And I think, again, Donald Trump is quite sensitive to that. Right now, he still thinks that he has the upper hand, but we'll see. And into that is intertwined what's going on with Putin and the talks over Ukraine, which are going to kind of restart in earnest. So I think, it's an interesting moment where it's not just about tariffs, it's not just about Donald Trump, but it's also about the question of America's superpower status being challenged in a kind of meaningful way for the first time, or in the biggest way that we've seen in many generations. And China is at the heart of that, alongside India and alongside Russia.
It's fascinating to get your insight on all this, Ed. An incredibly exciting time to be covering the world of economics, and I'm sure we'll have you back on Trump 100 to help us understand what's going on a little bit more.
I would love to be invited back, but at your pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we haven't had Ed on the pod for quite a few months, so good to hear from him. Come back soon, Ed. But that is it for today. We will see you tomorrow for plenty more on Trump 100.
And do remember, you can send us an email at trump100@sky.uk with any thoughts and questions. But bye for now.
Bye-bye.